China is one of the few civilizations that never truly broke. While others collapsed and were forgotten, it adapted, endured, and remembered. For over 4,000 years, dynasties rose and fell, but the idea of China, the systems, the language, the identity, stayed. Its origins trace back to the valleys of the Yellow River, known both for giving life and for taking it away. Around 3000 BCE, Neolithic cultures like the Yangshao and Longshan began shaping what would become the world's longest continuous civilization. They farmed millet, raised pigs and chickens, and stored surplus in carefully designed earthen homes. This wasn't a civilization of sudden monuments. It evolved slowly, building with rammed earth instead of stone, organizing villages into grids, digging early canals to tame wild rivers. They developed jade tools, painted pottery, and laid down the first bricks of what would become one of history's most sophisticated bureaucracies. Later legends spoke of ancient sages who taught the people how to plant, irrigate, write, and govern. Whether they existed or not, the ideas attributed to them, systems over superstition, structure over chaos, became China's DNA. Even early on, they believed society must be orderly, with a clear sense of hierarchy, responsibility, and harmony between people and nature. Time in China didn't move in revolutions. It moved in cycles, dynasties rising, falling, and being replaced. But unlike in the West, collapse didn't mean erasure. The past was kept, studied, and reused. Here, history wasn't just memory, it was infrastructure. And as the centuries passed, this ancient system would grow larger than any king, more stable than any wall. Not a story of sudden explosions, but of steady expansion. Not a spark, but an ember that never went out. In ancient China, no ruler held power forever, only a mandate. A ruler was not chosen by birthright alone, but by virtue. At least, that was the belief. They called it Tianming, the mandate of heaven. Not from a divine figure, but from a natural order. If an emperor ruled wisely, with fairness and care, it was said that the heavens supported him. But if he became corrupt, greedy, or cruel, natural disasters, famine, and rebellion were seen as signs that his time had ended. It was both a political weapon and a philosophical safeguard. This idea first emerged during the Zhou dynasty around 1046 BCE. After overthrowing the Shang rulers, the Zhou leaders needed to justify their rebellion. They claimed the previous dynasty had lost the mandate, and with it, their right to rule. The concept spread quickly. It gave rulers legitimacy, but also kept them accountable, at least in theory. A drought, a flood, or a revolt could be interpreted as proof that the emperor had lost his virtue. And when a new leader rose from the ashes, they too claimed they had received the mandate. This cycle shaped over 2,000 years of Chinese history. Dynasties didn't just fall, they lost the mandate. And new ones didn't just rise, they claimed to restore balance. It was a flexible idea, one that explained chaos and justified order. No other civilization had a political model quite like this. Not a single ruler chosen by God, not an unbreakable line of kings, but a conditional agreement between ruler, people, and nature. And so, China's history became a rhythm. The rise of power, the slow rot of corruption, the signal from the earth, and the shift to something new. From Zhou to Qin, From Han to Tang, the mandate became a kind of invisible law, never written, never signed, but always felt. Power wasn't inherited, it had to be earned. China was not born united, it was forged in war. Before it became an empire, it was a battlefield. Hundreds of feudal states vying for power, carving borders with blades, alliances, and betrayals. Between 475 and 221 BCE, this period of blood and strategy came to be known as the Warring States era. It was not chaos without purpose, it was evolution by fire. 7 major states, Qin, Chu, Zhao, Wei, Han, Yan, and Qi, dominated the landscape. Each one built armies, dug moats, and experimented with new forms of warfare. Iron replaced bronze. Chariots gave way to mass infantry formations. Crossbows were improved. Armies swelled to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Tactics became doctrine. Spies, deception, and diplomacy became weapons as sharp as swords. The goal was no longer survival, it was domination. And one state emerged as the most ruthless, disciplined, and efficient: Qin. Under Qin Shi Huang, the Qin state crushed its rivals and, in 221 BCE, unified the fragmented regions into a single empire. But peace didn't follow. New threats loomed, not from within, but from the northern steppes, where nomadic groups like the Xiongnu rode swift horses and struck fast. To protect this fragile empire, Qin ordered the connection of various old fortifications and began constructing what would become the Great Wall. This was not the polished stone monuments seen in postcards. The original walls were rammed earth, packed by laborers, prisoners, and soldiers. Stretching thousands of kilometers, it was a feat of logistics more than architecture, meant to delay invasions, not stop them entirely. It sent a message: this land is ours, this border is drawn. But war in China wasn't just about brute strength, it was about structure. Even before the Qin, thinkers like Sun Tzu were writing about warfare as an art. His text, The Art of War, emphasized deception, timing, and psychological control. Victory wasn't in blood, it was in breaking your enemy before the first blow. This mindset shaped Chinese military philosophy for centuries. Wars were not just fought on open ground. They were fought in the mind, in court, in strategy. By the time of the Han Dynasty, China maintained permanent standing armies, border garrisons, supply networks, and even military merit systems. Soldiers could rise through ranks by proving skill, a system designed not for glory, but for stability. And through it all, the walls stood, repaired, rebuilt, extended, not just as stone barriers, but as symbols of what had been won and what might still be lost. China's unity was born in war, its endurance was built on preparation, and its empire was shaped not only by those who ruled it, but by those it feared. Long before printing, China ran its empire with the brush. Administration didn't begin with armies. It began with characters, carved, brushed, stamped, and archived. By 1200 BCE, early Chinese script appeared on oracle bones, flat pieces of ox shoulder or turtle shell used for divination. Questions about crops, health, and decisions were etched with a stylus and then heated until they cracked. The patterns were interpreted and the answers preserved. These weren't just rituals, They were records. And from that practice came one of the world's oldest continuous writing systems, Chinese characters. Each symbol carried meaning, but not in the way alphabets do. These characters were layered with sound, image, and concept. A system built not for speed, but for memory, for permanence. Over time, writing shifted from bone to bamboo strips, then to silk, and later, paper. Around the 2nd century BCE, early paper was created from mulberry bark and hemp. By the Han Dynasty, it was being used in record-keeping, communication, and administration. But writing wasn't just about words. It was a path to power. As China grew, the emperor could no longer manage everything directly. A new class emerged, the scholar officials, men trained to govern, chosen not by bloodline, but by intellect. To join them, one had to pass the imperial examination system, one of history's most rigorous bureaucratic filters. It wasn't about strategy or charisma. It was about mastering Confucian texts, poetry, and ethical philosophy. Exams could last days. Candidates were locked in small rooms with only ink, paper, and their minds. Success meant access to status and stability. Failure meant starting over or giving up. This system created a meritocratic ideal. That ability, not ancestry, should rule. And while it wasn't perfect, corruption and nepotism still crept in. It laid the groundwork for a government powered by written law, archived knowledge, and intellectual discipline. In China, ink was not just for art. It was the blueprint of empire, silent, permanent, and precise. Silk was never just fabric. It was a message, one that reached far beyond China's borders. By the time the Han Dynasty stabilized the empire in the 2nd century BCE, trade was no longer a local affair. China had what the world wanted, and it was ready to move it. Silk, lightweight and strong, was unlike anything else known in the West. Its production was a carefully guarded secret. The process began with silkworms feeding on mulberry leaves, then spinning cocoons of shimmering thread. These cocoons were boiled, unraveled, dyed, and woven by skilled hands, mostly women, who passed techniques down through generations. The result was a product so rare, so smooth, so luminous, that it became a currency of power across Eurasia. As demand grew, the Han court opened a network of overland trade routes that would later be called the Silk Road, though it carried far more than silk. From the Chinese capital at Chang'an, caravans packed with goods ventured westward, crossing deserts, mountains, and vast steppes. They passed through Central Asia, reaching cities like Samarkand and Bactria, and eventually connected with Roman and Persian markets. In return, China imported glassware, precious stones, horses, gold, and knowledge, astronomy, medicine, even musical instruments. Trade was not just material, it was intellectual. Cultures collided, blended, and reshaped each other at every stop. But the government didn't leave it all to chance. State-run monopolies controlled salt, iron, and silk production. Prices were regulated, taxes were collected in grain or cloth, and roads were maintained to ensure military and commercial access. Merchants, though wealthy, held lower social status than farmers or scholars. Still, they moved the gears of the economy, quietly linking villages, towns, and foreign courts. Even sea routes expanded. By the Tang dynasty, Chinese ships navigated to India, Southeast Asia, and beyond, trading porcelain, tea, spices, and paper. Ports like Guangzhou became cosmopolitan hubs where Arabic, Tamil, Persian, and Chinese languages mixed with the smell of spices and ink. China didn't conquer the world by sword, it connected it by trade. The Silk Road was more than a path for goods. It was a transmission line for ideas, technologies, and trust. It showed that power could flow through textiles and tea as surely as it did through soldiers. And long after empires fell and cities crumbled, Chinese silk would still be found in Egyptian tombs, Roman vaults, and Viking hoards. Soft, quiet proof that influence doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it travels in silence, woven into every thread. To build a civilization of millions, China first learned to master the land. Agriculture wasn't just a necessity, it was the backbone of everything. Stability, hierarchy, war, population growth, all of it depended on food. And China, more than most ancient powers, developed one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems the world had ever seen. Its geography demanded it. The north, dry and flat, was suited for millet and later wheat. The south, warmer and wetter, became the heartland of rice cultivation, a labor-intensive crop that, once mastered, could feed vast populations with high caloric returns. By 5000 BCE, early Neolithic communities along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers had already begun domesticating crops. Over the centuries, they didn't just plant, they engineered entire landscapes to serve their needs. Terraced hillsides, irrigation canals, levees, reservoirs, each one designed with intention, each one maintained by hand. The Chinese farmer wasn't isolated. He was part of a state-managed system. Under dynasties like the Han and Tang, governments conducted large-scale land surveys, redistributed land to peasants, and organized tax systems based on grain production. Officials recorded crop yields, predicted floods, and constructed granaries to store surplus in times of famine. In some eras, the state even provided seeds, tools, and farming manuals to rural communities. Knowledge was not hoarded, it was distributed, and it wasn't just about survival. Chinese cuisine developed early and with incredible diversity. From the bubbling clay pots of Sichuan to the delicate dumplings of the north, the food reflected not only geography, but philosophy, balance of flavors, seasonal ingredients, harmony between hot and cold, yin and yang. Rice was more than a staple, it was ritual. It appeared on ancestral altars, in poetry, in taxes, and in law. A good harvest was a national event, a failed one, a political crisis. China also pioneered tools that spread far beyond its borders. The iron plow, multi-tube seed drills, and chain pumps for irrigation, all developed centuries before they appeared in Europe. By the Song dynasty, 960–1279, agricultural productivity surged with the introduction of fast-ripening rice from Vietnam, doubling the number of harvests in southern regions. This agricultural boom allowed cities to expand, trade to flourish, and population to exceed 100 million. Food was not just fuel, it was strategy. The empire was not only defended with walls, it was secured with rice paddies and irrigation ditches. In a world where the balance of power often tipped with a failed crop or a river's flood, China learned to make the land speak, and it answered with fields of plenty. In ancient China, philosophy was not confined to temples or scrolls. It shaped daily life. Rather than worship gods in the way other ancient civilizations did, many in China turned to ideas, systems of thought meant to guide behavior, family, and government. Two major traditions emerged and often coexisted: Confucianism and Taoism. Confucianism, based on the teachings of Confucius, Confucius, was not a religion, but a framework for society. It emphasized 5 key relationships: ruler to subject, parent to child, husband to wife, elder to younger, and friend to friend. Harmony came from knowing your role and fulfilling it with respect and duty. Education, loyalty, and filial piety, the deep respect for one's parents and ancestors, became pillars of the Confucian worldview. The ideal citizen was not a warrior, but a gentleman scholar, measured, polite, and morally upright. Governments embraced these values, embedding them into laws and the imperial examination system. A good official wasn't just smart, he was expected to be virtuous, guided by ethics more than ambition. In contrast, Taoism, sometimes spelled Taoism, offered something quieter. It urged people to follow the Tao, the way, a natural, spontaneous order that could not be forced or fully explained. According to Taoist thought, trying to control the world often led to imbalance. True wisdom came from observing nature, embracing simplicity, and letting things unfold as they must. Where Confucianism built structures, Taoism softened them. Where Confucianism instructed, Taoism invited reflection. Both systems influenced medicine, politics, martial arts, and even city planning, not through dogma, but through ideas about balance, rhythm, and right action. And while beliefs varied across regions and dynasties, the core remained. Harmony was not achieved through conquest. It was cultivated from within, not by commanding the skies, but by listening to the earth. The emperor sat at the center of it all, but he never ruled alone. China's dynasties were not run by one man's will, but by a complex network of officials, advisors, generals, and silent watchers in the shadows. Power was layered, and those layers often pulled in different directions. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, not as a divine figure, but as a representative of order. His role was to maintain balance between regions, between people, between the past and the present. But as the empire expanded, so did the palace, and with it, the politics. Inside the Forbidden City, or earlier courts like Chang'an, decisions passed through many hands before reaching the people. The court bureaucracy, built over centuries, was a machine of paperwork, etiquette, and coded language. One wrong word in a memorial could end a career. One rumor could end a life. Among the most powerful figures were the eunuchs, men who had been castrated to serve within the palace. They held no families, no outside loyalties, and over time, no rivals in proximity to the emperor. Trusted with secrets, communication, and access to the ruler himself, eunuchs sometimes became kingmakers or destroyers of dynasties. Conflicts often arose between scholar officials and eunuchs, each accusing the other of corruption. Some emperors used these tensions to control both sides. Others lost control entirely. Power moved like smoke, difficult to grasp, dangerous to chase. At the provincial level, Governors and magistrates managed law and order, tax collection, and local disputes. Communication from the center to the outer reaches of the empire could take weeks, even months. Maintaining unity over such vast territory required more than force. It required obedience, ritual, and reputation. And when dynasties fell, it wasn't always from war. Sometimes they collapsed from within, eaten away by bribery, mistrust, or silence in the wrong hall at the wrong time. The emperor wore silk and jade, but around him swirled ambition dressed in shadows. China's strength wasn't just in its armies, it was in the careful art of ruling without losing control. What do compasses, paper money, and printing presses have in common? They were all born in ancient China. While others fought for territory, China quietly reshaped the tools of civilization. From paper to gunpowder, the inventions that emerged from Chinese thought and experimentation weren't just clever, they were transformative. They altered the course of global history, often without the world knowing where they began. Start with paper. Before China, writing was carved into bone, pressed into clay, or inked on costly parchment. Around 105 CE, during the Eastern Han Dynasty, a court official named Kai Lun developed a new material: pulped mulberry bark, hemp, and old cloth, flattened and dried into sheets. It was cheap, durable, and easy to produce. A quiet revolution. Paper allowed governments to issue documents, poets to write freely, and scholars to copy texts without limit. Knowledge, once trapped in the hands of the elite, could now be multiplied and passed on. Then came printing. By the 7th century, the Chinese were using woodblock printing, carving entire pages onto wooden slabs, inking them, and pressing them onto paper. A few centuries later, movable clay type appeared, allowing individual characters to be rearranged, a precursor to Gutenberg's press by nearly 400 years. Books, calendars, medical texts, and maps spread faster than ever. The printed word became not just a tool of state, but a carrier of culture. And then there was gunpowder. Discovered by Taoist alchemists around the 9th century, it began not as a weapon, but as a search for immortality. Early texts recorded formulas of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter that produced violent reactions. It didn't grant eternal life, but it changed warfare forever. At first, gunpowder was used in fire arrows, bombs, and flaming lances. Later, it powered cannons and firearms. Though the technology spread west along trade routes, its origin remained unmistakably Chinese. The fourth of the 4 great inventions was the magnetic compass. By the 11th century, navigators were using lodestone, naturally magnetized rock, suspended on water to determine direction. This allowed merchants and explorers to sail with confidence even under cloudy skies. The age of oceanic navigation began not in Europe, but in Chinese harbors. Other advances filled every part of life: mechanical clocks, seismographs, wheelbarrows, suspension bridges, acupuncture, and paper money, centuries before it appeared elsewhere. These weren't isolated bursts of genius. They were the result of a civilization that valued problem-solving, observation, and adaptation. Invention in China was not an accident. It was a habit. Each breakthrough was built on systems that supported learning, from imperial libraries to craft guilds, from scholarly patronage to state-sponsored research. And while dynasties came and went, the legacy of innovation endured. written in ink, etched in gears, and packed into gunpowder casks. China didn't just build walls, it built blueprints, tools that outlived their makers and reached across oceans. In ancient China, art was not decoration. It was a reflection of the world and of the self. Where some cultures painted triumph and war, China painted silence, mist, and thought. Its art did not seek to conquer the eye, it aimed to calm it. From as early as the Shang dynasty, bronze vessels were cast with complex patterns, not just for rituals, but as symbols of order and legacy. Later, during the Han and Tang dynasties, the artistic world expanded outward into poetry, painting, ceramics, music, and calligraphy, each with its own rules, its own voice, its own purpose. Poetry, in particular, held a status few other civilizations granted it. To write verse was not a hobby, it was a sign of education, taste, and inner refinement. Scholars, emperors, and generals all composed poetry, not to impress, but to express. During the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, poetry reached its golden age. Writers like Li Bai and Du Fu created works still memorized today, not loud with ego, but soft with longing, loss, and nature's passing moods. The moonlight in front of my bed, I mistook it for frost on the ground. Li Bai. A single line could contain a whole world. Calligraphy, too, was more than handwriting. It was movement, discipline, and spirit in ink. Every stroke had intention. Every pause had weight. A good calligrapher was judged not by style alone, but by the energy behind their brush. Painting favored simplicity over spectacle. While Western art often pursued realism, Chinese artists let suggestion do the work. A mountain shrouded in mist, a lone fisherman on a river, the distant sweep of bamboo in wind. They painted the space between things, not just the things themselves. This wasn't laziness, it was philosophy, drawn from Taoist and Confucian ideals. Art was a mirror of balance, of restraint, of the flow between seen and unseen. Even music followed this path. Stringed instruments like the guqin, pipa, and erhu created tones meant not to fill the air, but to shape it. Court performances, folk melodies, and ceremonial songs all echoed the same principle: harmony before volume. Porcelain, too, became a language of elegance. From white glazed Tang pieces to the cobalt blue Ming vases, Chinese ceramics were coveted worldwide, refined, durable, timeless. Artisans didn't sign their work to be remembered. They did it to serve beauty, balance, and silence. In China, the highest art was invisible, felt, not forced. A mountain in ink. A poem whispered by water. A character shaped by breath. Here, culture didn't shout. It waited for you to slow down and listen. China did not build its strength on brute force. It perfected the art of not needing to fight. Across its long history, China faced wave after wave of conflict, tribal uprisings, internal rebellions, nomadic raids, and full-scale invasions. Yet through it all, it developed a unique approach to war, one that favored patience over chaos, strategy over impulse, and control over destruction. Long before standing armies became common, Chinese states maintained militias of trained peasants. Military service was not a separate caste. It was an expected part of civic life. And as warfare became more sophisticated, so did the thinking behind it. One figure stands at the heart of this evolution: Sun Tzu. Around the 5th century BCE, during the Warring States period, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, a collection of maxims that would outlast empires. It was not a celebration of violence. It was a warning, a guide, and a weapon of the mind. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu. He emphasized deception, timing, intelligence, and adaptability. Victory was not found in the clash, but in positioning, in knowing when not to act. This philosophy influenced not just generals, but rulers, advisors, and even rival civilizations. By the time of the Qin and Han dynasties, China had formed large, disciplined, standing armies. Units were structured, ranked, and drilled. Soldiers carried standardized weapons: bronze swords, iron spears, crossbows. Armor varied, from leather to iron lamella, and tactics included both open battle formations and defensive ambushes. Terrain was studied, supply lines were critical, fortifications were everywhere, but military power extended beyond battlefields. Defensive architecture, such as border fortresses, watchtowers, and the Great Wall itself, were all part of a larger system, not just to repel, but to delay, confuse, and exhaust. Signal towers used smoke by day and fire by night to send warnings across thousands of miles in minutes. Canals doubled as troop transport and flood control. Even roads were built with troop movement in mind. War was never romanticized. It was dangerous, costly, and used only when diplomacy, tribute, or marriage alliances failed. The goal was always stability, not expansion for its own sake. And when invasion did occur, from the Xiongnu, Mongols, Jurchens, or Manchus, China did not always resist with armies alone. It used politics, economics, trade deals, and slow cultural absorption. Some conquerors were eventually absorbed into Chinese customs, language, and bureaucracy. Because survival wasn't just about strength, it was about endurance. In Chinese strategy, the smartest general wins before the first weapon is drawn. Power is quiet. Preparation is loud only in its results. And the greatest battles are often the ones no one ever knew were fought. Empires fall, names change, borders shift. But China never truly disappeared. It adapted, absorbed, reformed, and kept going. What began beside the Yellow River as scattered farms and fragile beliefs became one of the longest-running civilizational stories in human history. The dynasties are gone. The emperors are silent. But their systems remain. In philosophy, in agriculture, in governance, in language. Threads from thousands of years ago still run through modern cities, laws, rituals, and daily habits. In China today, children still learn calligraphy. Farmers still harvest rice from fields designed centuries ago, and poets still write with the same brushstrokes used during the Tang dynasty. The compass turned the world toward discovery. Paper turned thought into permanence. Gunpowder reshaped warfare. Silk stitched continents together. These weren't isolated achievements. They were chapters in a strategy of continuity. China didn't aim to be loud. It aimed to last. Even the idea of China itself, the Zhongguo, or central state, was never just a place. It was a concept, a center of balance, a system under constant revision, where the past wasn't discarded, it was refined. Foreign rulers came. Some stayed, some tried to break it, none erased it. The world today still traces the lines China once drew, in its paper money, in its legal codes, in its philosophies of harmony and order, in every bureaucracy, in every standardized test, in every calendar divided by predictable cycles. The echo of China is present. It is not simply history, it is inheritance. Because while China may have once claimed to rule under heaven, what it truly ruled was time, not by force, but by structure. And so, the legacy remains, silent, steady, still under heaven.